All right. Well, I usually start off by saying hello, sports fans, but today I'm gonna say hello, life fans, and I think that's going to make a little more sense to people as we kind of have our conversation, Alan. But we've got a special guest today, Alan Jaeger from Jager Sports, and Alan, we got brought together by a mutual associate, and I will say one of my life and sports mentors, Coach George Horton. And so I'm just really, really appreciative of the fact that he reached out and recommended that you and I touch base. And so, you have created the Jager Sports, your site and everything that you guys provide with Jager Sports between throwing care, and you're also into mental health. But I've just been fortunate to be able to have an opportunity to speak to you the last few weeks, and you and I kind of hit it off with some particular synergy. But I'd like to welcome you. And I know that you're familiar with the fast pitch world and that you have some involvement in it, but my goal is to tell your story and to let your story be told a little bit more to I always say maybe we have 12 or 15 listeners. We might be up to 17, something like that. But, we have an opportunity, just share the conversation. So welcome to the Firecracker. And I'm going to throw in Alliance and PCFL and all these other entities and the people we're serving. But thanks for joining us this morning. I really appreciate you being with us and excited to tell a little bit of your story today.
Well, listen, man, first of all, thanks for having me on. I love the fact we met through George. And as you said, we're into the business of teaching and connection with people and helping and being of service. So I think that's why we've had so many good conversations. And to me, this is just another opportunity to have a great conversation. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I enjoy the fact that we're lucky that there are so many things going on in our fast pitch industry. It's evolving and growing so fast, and there's a lot of conversations and potential partnerships based on product and services and different things like that. But I think that what I've absolutely enjoyed the most with you is just conversing about life and how that fits into something that's relatable to everybody that could be spending their time with us today. So I want to spend about 10 minutes just talking about your background. You and I have spoken a little bit about it, but let's go back to how Jager Sports were founded, how you kind of got into the whole. And today we're going to talk specifically about arm care. In the future, we do want to talk about kind of mental health and just kind of mental balance. And I think that's something that doesn't scare people as much nowadays. But today, mostly just relate to arm care and why that's important. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about Jager Sports and kind of how it was started, how you founded it, and how far it goes back, and really why.
Well, how far it goes back? Well, you and I can relate to that because we're very similar that as far as age-wise. Jager Sports technically started around 1990. I was a pitching coach at LA Mission Junior College up here in LA, and I just got really heavy into the Far Eastern arts. And in college, I went through a difficult time as a pitcher at Cal State Northridge, and saw a sports psychologist and changed my major to psychology. And it was in that field that in one of my classes, actually, the professor brought up a really cool story, and I went up to him afterward. It was a Zen story, and I said, "Where is that from?" He gave me the name of the book. One thing led to another, and I discovered a gentleman named Alan Watts. And so I really got heavy into the mental part of the game because I felt like I wanted to know what happened to me, because in a way I feel like it sort of ended my career. But of course, as we all know in life, those are like the springboards, and those are the blessing in disguises that got me on my path to where around 1990 I started writing a book called Getting Focused, Staying Focused, that came out about 4 years later. And it was during that time that I was writing my book, and I was coaching at Mission College, and I was really playing with meditation with the kids and my mental training principles. And as a pitching coach, I had always long tossed myself as a player. To me, it wasn't like a program. It was just something you did because it felt right. And so I guess what happened, Tony, is I just sort of merged my background with the mental game with throwing. And then around 1994, I believe, I met a gentleman named Perry Husband, who's actually done a ton of stuff in the baseball, probably and softball community. So he's the author of Effective Velocity. He's just a fascinating guy. And ironically, he played at Cal State Northridge too. And he turned me on to these surgical tubing apparatuses, and I was like, what is this? And I think it was around the same time I was studying yoga. And so I think the elasticity part of it, the yoga, if you will. And it's funny because this day I tell people, you know, band work is like doing yoga in your arm, and technically in your body. So it's sort of a cool thing looking back how, you know, I took the mental game. I was big into long toss. I got the band, you know, I got into band work and yoga. And so I started doing, you know, camps and clinics and private stuff. And then at some point, I brought in a player that I work with at Cal Lutheran named Lou Bird. And then currently my business partner is Jim Batcher, who was a teammate of mine. He was actually my long toss partner in college. And maybe I will tell one other cool story about how Jim and I kind of got to know each other. I was a walk-on JC transfer. Jim was one of the captains, but Jim and I both wanted to long toss. He was a center fielder, I was a pitcher. And this is something I can remember like yesterday, Tony. When everybody was done with the throwing, the coach used to, not when everybody was done with the throwing, at some point, you know, the coach would ring the bell, like, hey, come on in from the throwing. And Jim and I, we basically went from foul line to warning track pretty much every day. And all the players would come in by the dugout, and the coach never rushed us. And I love to tell the story because it goes back to this whole theme on arm care and arm strength and influencing the game on defense from a position player's point of view. And the coach waited until we were done. And it felt kind of cool for me because, you know, normally I would have run into, like everybody else, you know, I would have felt like, okay, that's time to go in. But I was with Jim. And Jim was throwing players out on defense and influencing games. And so the coach was going to make sure that Jim was not rushed. And I'm not saying he ultimately wasn't going to rush everybody, but that was one of my real memories about, we took our time, we took pride in our arms. We felt like it was, we got to a point, imagine this, throwing was fun, throwing was energizing, throwing was inspiring, and throwing was an art form, and it still is to me. So in a nutshell, Tony, that's sort of like a little bit of a smorgasbord, if you will, of kind of how Jager Sports came into being.
But it really goes back to, like, for a lot of us, especially us guys, going back to just playing catch. You know, it's something that we love to do. So I think that, I don't think I'm so much older than most of our families, the parents of our players now, but, you know, throwing a tennis ball against the garage. I don't personally, for me, I don't know if my parents ever bought me a new baseball. I might have found one or two. So anything that was round, usually something that was rubber because it bounced, you know, but it just stemmed from playing catch. And then, you know, similar experience, you get to college and all of a sudden there's another level of playing catch. And I think that the reason I want to start with arm care today is because, you know, in our fast pitch industry, that playing catch or having a catch, right? It's special to our dads, even dads that catch their daughters who pitch. That's a special experience for them to be able to sit on the bucket and just have that time with them. You know, I want to make sure it's as enjoyable for their daughters, but it's about playing catch. And I think that men, there's a difference in how the genders look at playing catch. And you and I were both fortunate enough to see something a little more specialized. You know, it's funny you use surgical tubing. If I say that now, someone's going to look at me funny. And I think I called them synergy bands when they were yellow. They first came out. So I played in the mid 80s. And so I remember when the first bands came out. And long toss was also very, very important part of my, let's say, higher level development as far as what it did for my arm, as far as increasing the strength of it. So when we start to talk about arm care, and the reason that I want to talk about this topic and present this to the people in fast pitch is that because often we don't prioritize it with our young ladies. If you look at, you know, typical softball player and you look into her bag, she takes care of her bat. They do understand the importance of their bat. Hitting is prioritized in softball, but throwing really is not. And I don't think it's because they consciously don't prioritize it. It just doesn't become a priority usually until somebody has an injury or they're unable to throw the way that they used to. So now we have to take a look at it. So kind of like there's smoke coming from under your hood, or the red lights are coming on, or check engine, right? And so then it becomes a priority, and usually it portals through the rehab part of it, right? So I think it's something that's very relevant. And for anyone that is listening right now that you've experienced, you know, you've taken your daughters to an orthopedic surgeon, or the difference between an orthopedic surgeon and a general practitioner, even the different types of recommendations on, you know, shut it down for 8 weeks versus sports orthopedist understands the demands of the athlete a little bit more. And so that being said, why is arm care important? Like what, if we talk about it, even there's a difference between the way a baseball player and a softball player throw the ball. So, give me your reasons on why arm care is important, and kind of why is it different for a young lady throwing a softball than a guy throwing a baseball?
Well, for starters, I mean, look, I look at throwing as like, this is a tool that you can influence the game on defense. Obviously, for pitchers, it's vital. That I would say it's vital for everybody, because if you can't throw, you can't play. I know it sounds pretty simple, but that's the reality. So, number one, healthy. Yeah, of course you want to be healthy, but two, I think it's happening now, but it's taken a while for it to come around. I think in both sports, which is your arm is a tool. And if I'm an athlete, and I wake up, and especially, in baseball, right, there's the scouts cards have 5 tools, but one of them is the arm. And so if you're an athlete, the question is really more about it's almost like a pride thing, or it's almost like, I guess it's a form of excellence, which is how great do you want, I use this term a lot, how great do you want to be at X? How great do you want your arm to be? Do you want it to be a C plus, a D minus, or do you want it to be an A plus? And it doesn't mean everybody's going to be able to throw in baseball 90 plus miles an hour, maybe in softball, I don't know, is it 70 plus? But it's not that everybody has to have necessarily the strongest arm on the team. But I use the analogy a lot of a treasure chest, which is your arm is a treasure chest. Let's find out what's in it. Now, you may not, you may not get to a point where you have the strongest arm again on the team, but maybe your arm is much stronger than it was when you started. And maybe it's way more accurate because now you're taking throwing seriously. So I think to answer your question, Tony, number one is it's simple. It's health. You want to be healthy so that you can play as long as you can in your career, and you don't want an arm injury to be the reason that takes you out of the game. You don't want a poor arm to be the reason why you can't play a position like shortstop anymore, and you have to play second base, or you have to play in the outfield, and that could shorten your career. So it keeps your options open. And then lastly, I'm going to keep coming back to this word of enhancement, which is look at your arm as a tool that you can enhance. Yes, let's make sure we're healthy, number one. But two, how great can you get your arm to be? And why would you not invest time into getting the most out of your arm? And I will say one other thing before I forget. Arm care is a station, throwing is a station, hitting is a station. Bunt defense is a station, ground balls is a station, fly balls is a station. They are stations now. They're not something you do to get through so you can go hit or go take pregame infield. Arm care is a station. Just assume it's going to be 10 to 15 minutes. Throwing is a station. Assume it's going to be 15 to 20 minutes, right? And I understand people right away were like, well, wait a minute, I don't know if I have that much time. How great do you want your arm? Do you want your arm to be an asset or a liability? It just sort of comes down to that. So I want to make sure I got that word station in, but in a nutshell, it's injury prevention and it's enhancement. Let's do those two things.
I think that's a really important point for our coaches to take away, because I think we all know that often in practice, the pitchers aren't utilized, unless it's specific live pitching or something like that. But to be able to create a whole practice plan for pitchers and create their own stations, we're going to, as you just said, that we're going to enhance kind of their experience and their ability to develop. And I think that's really, really important. We prioritize playing catch growing up and throwing. Gosh, if I never saw Nolan Ryan on TV, I mean, Nolan Ryan, come on. And then for me, being at Dodger Stadium in the last row of the pavilion, and Goose Gossage was pitching against the Dodgers, and I heard the glove pop behind me. Like he popped the catcher's glove, and I heard the echo of it, and I heard it behind me, and I just wanted to recreate that sound. So that's something that kind of drew us in, right? In softball, it's so competitive right now, and the ultimate win for most, if not all players, is to receive that scholarship. And so the reality is now there's a lot of stress, and there's a lot of emphasis on, is my daughter going to go to school? When's she going to school? It's a very stressful roller coaster ride. The return on investment is actually very, very high, but this is an excellent opportunity to increase your daughter's value. How does she throw? Instantly. I mean, you and I have talked about this. College camps are right now a very accessible, important option for players to be able to be in the presence of college coaches. College coaches today in 2021 cannot speak to a protected or prospective student athlete until their junior year. but they can at a camp. Okay, so great. You got an opportunity now to meet a college coach that you may dream about playing for, but now first impressions, right? You cannot take a first impression back. So if you can throw the ball correctly, if you have a good arm, that instantly stands out. And you just mentioned something again that baseball players are aware of, and that is the 5 tools of scouting, right? And so your arm strength, can you field, can you hit for power, can you run? And so what an opportunity for anyone that's in this saturated market. And it's good that it's saturated, meaning there's a ton of softball players out there right now, but an opportunity to be able to increase your value. And the great part of it is that it's instantly noticeable, whether your arm is strong or not, just throwing correctly, right? At the right trajectory on the ball and just how you're throwing the ball. So I think that we have a really good opportunity in front of us to continue to educate our industry and the people within it. And then again, hopefully inspire them to dig a little bit deeper into this, to look at your website, to look in kind of, and we will get deeper into the arm care programs, but what an opportunity, because most people aren't prioritizing it. So you can stay in that mix, or you can say, boy, I'm going to be one of the first ones to really start prioritizing this on another level. So you as a coach to incorporate it into your team, you as a player or as a family to start prioritizing it in your own personal development. And then in the end, it's a win-win-win-win-win. It's going to help you stay healthier longer. It's going to increase your value as a player. It projects a better image for our sport on television. Right now, the best of the best in fast pitch, let's take the College World Series, they're playing the game in a way that's it's beautiful. And it's great. And now we have 80% of the rest of our industry that need to kind of bring up that standard as well, So talk to me a little bit, you had mentioned too about just the weight of the ball, right? The difference isn't just throwing a ball. The baseball, it's a small little, sometimes we call it a little pea, right? And then you've got the size of the softball. So what have you noticed as far as how that's affected the way a young lady may throw the ball initially?
Yeah, we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we went out to U of A with Mike Andrea, and I think that's what started the conversation. And ironically, my partner Jim, who, by the way, on a side note, Jim was a senior at Cal State Northridge, 5'9" outfielder. He talked to one scout before the draft. The scout brought him over to Pierce College like 3 days before the draft, had him go down the right field line, threw him a few baseballs, and had him throw to third base to make throws. Jim had an above average major league arm. In fact, he was voted best arm in the PCL one year. And that's what Jim feels like got him drafted, is the scout knew this guy's got a major league arm. No matter what, this guy's going to influence games. Jim happened to be an All-American who could really hit and run. But as a side note, that got the scout's attention like right away. So the size of the ball is something that when we were with Mike, I think it's when we first started talking about it, Jim actually had mentioned this idea of the size of a softball, because we were noticing that there was gals out there that mechanically we could tell it's like they were kind of pie throwing. we were surprised that, and this has been common. We've been out at UCLA, we've been out at Cal State Fullerton, and we've noticed that there's sort of a throwing motion with some of the girls, and we were trying to figure out why do some girls, really have this beautiful arm swing and very fluid looking, and then others are very short and rigid and sort of a pie throwing motion. And so Jim brought up this idea of if the girls aren't using it like 8 to 12, they're not using necessarily they're using the same ball essentially. And so the weight of the ball alone, if the first movement is down, so the ball is down and so the fingertips are above the ball, you just can't hold the ball. First of all, the ball is too big. Secondly, it's too heavy. And so of course, what you're going to do is you're going to go to this motion. I've brought this up with Sue Enquist. I've brought this up with a number of people that all are 100% in agreement. You and I, we've talked about it. And so I just feel like in a way, it's almost like a perfect storm. Girls at a young age are starting to go into this pie throwing motion because they can't support the weight of the ball. Then because of this motion, they're not maybe able to throw the ball as well. Maybe they know it looks funky. All of a sudden, maybe they don't really want to throw now. It's almost like throwing is sort of something they want to stay away from. And so I just feel like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy almost, to where they get to a point where they don't want to throw. Maybe they don't feel like they have a very good arm. Maybe they don't feel like it looks that good. And so now throwing is just hidden. And ironically, when we see someone with this beautiful throwing motion, I can't say all of them, but it seemed like the ones we asked about grew up playing baseball, and they had a smaller ball in their hand, and they had that nice, beautiful, fluid motion. And so I just feel like, from someone that's not nearly as involved with the softball world as you and Sue, but it just feels to me like if there was a transitional ball from 8 to 12, let's say to 12 to 14, just something to where even the ball could be the same size, just lighter. It'd be better, of course, if it was smaller. I just feel like that the young ladies growing up could stay in the correct arm swing, and all of a sudden throwing for them would feel natural, and they would see positive results as a result of it. And I just feel like that this could be, I actually feel like it could be transformative to the softball community. I feel like that a lot of young ladies, maybe at a young age, they may get into this sort of more funky mechanical pie throwing motion, short kind of rigid movement. And to me, it's almost, it could even affect maybe their self-esteem. They may feel like they're trying to hide their arm because maybe they know that their throwing motion doesn't look good, or they don't throw the ball very well. So now we're talking even about self-esteem, as opposed to growing up where the ball is lighter from, let's say, 8 to 12, the ball is smaller. And now they're just growing up like someone growing up playing baseball, and their arm now is an asset. Their arm is something that feels good. They want to throw. And I think this might be part of the issue as to why maybe throwing isn't seen as, I don't know if it's important is the right word, but just the time isn't put into it as much, because it's almost like, again, this perfect storm has created an environment where throwing, it's almost like that's an area that maybe a lot of the girls aren't that interested in doing, where if they grew up, I feel like really in more of this natural movement and throwing became a strength, it's something that would become organic. They would want to do it as they grew older. And I just believe so strongly that so many of these ladies growing up would thrive with their arm and hit all these different levels and stay healthy and want to throw. And all of a sudden throwing being a station is like, yeah, I can't wait to get there because I love throwing.
Well, I think you brought up a key point that definitely works in our fast pitch world, and that is the aesthetic part of it. You know, young ladies want to feel beautiful. They want to know they look beautiful, and it's not built in, because that wasn't something I was thinking about at 9 years old or 12 years old, that I wanted to throw beautifully, you know. And something else that you brought up, I think that kind of explains it too, with a baseball, and they do have a smaller ball for like the 10 and under players, but in baseball, you can create a motion that, whether you're mimicking, because that's really kind of what it was for a lot of us, that you're creating a motion that throws the ball correctly. In softball, you're throwing the ball functionally, and that throw creates the motion, but the motion wasn't correct. And so it's just being able to get the ball from point A to point B. And I know that we have this aspect also as well in baseball, but in softball, you have so many more people that have volunteered to coach. They volunteer to coach their kids in rec ball, right? There, you know, I've often asked, how'd you get into coaching? Well, my daughter needed a coach. So what was the requirement? You stepped forward and gave your time. There was no really proficiency or anything like that. And, you know, you and I have spoken before that it's kind of like diving into under the hood of a car. You can really get into the meat and potatoes of how something works, right? So there are a lot of biomechanical terms and anatomical terms that people can get into. But growing up, we weren't given those terms growing up in Little League. It was open the curtains with your thumbs down, right? So there were just simple little things. But in softball, you never really heard those. So just even right there of taking the ball out and your thumb going down, which is, okay, internally rotating your arm, right? And when you talk about pie throwing, there is no internal rotation. The ball's just coming straight up. So you'll see that rather than turn it back this way. So, you know, I know there's a lot of dads out there that they mimicked and they saw things. So, you know, if you're an old enough guy like me, you can picture Nolan Ryan's toe pointing down when he got into his windup. You know, we mimic behaviors. But if we talk about the aesthetic part to the young ladies, and then we acknowledge that, that's something that they hold on to. They do want to know that they look beautiful. That does register. They're not consciously looking for those terms, but, you know, we say this to our players all the time, and it's great when they can give me this response. What's the most attractive thing in the whole world? And they all write back on the chat, happiness. You know, so what is beautiful? Happiness. There's a certain connotation with your physical features and things like that. And then I like to bring up to our young ladies that, look, you could have the prettiest eyes in the school. but you cannot be very attractive because of the way you treat people. So I think that's an important key point. And part of what we want to do with these conversations is fast forward the learning curve for coaches and especially dads or anyone working with young ladies, because that's part of this too, is like, did I really have that approach in the 90s, my first 10 years? Heck no. I spoke like a baseball player, and I talked to them like they were boys. And, I didn't get that part of it. It was teaching the game the right way, but you weren't realizing how they were taking it. It was really building the relationships with the players that little by little, they would tell you how they just took what you said. And then you would realize, and I would think a lot of dads realize like, oh my God, I didn't want to make you to feel that way. I have a way of searing this point into your head, which now it's just politically incorrect nowadays, but it's the way that we're speaking. In order to coach, I tell people, it would be nice that if the nice conversation and just presenting information, if that really stuck, but you have to be able to disrupt. You have to be able to create a way to communicate where things stick in someone's mind, so it's not repeated over and over and over. So I think that aesthetic part of it is a really important way to look at it when you're dealing with your daughters and with your players, because it registers to them. And I think that's the challenge of working as a fast pitch coach, is we're here to be part of their world, not pull them into our world. We've heard this, and you bring up Coach Mike Andrea, who's I always consider a great friend, but also one of my mentors in the softball world. And so he was the first one that I heard it of. And I know a lot of people have heard this, but men have to play good to feel good, and girls have to feel good to play good. It's a reverse process, which is what always leads to the long car ride home. We're bitter and we're pissed off because of the outcome of the game, but we don't doubt our skills. There's a lot of guys, and you and I had fun with this in the last conversation. You can still throw the ball. I can't anymore. So there's that whole conversation of why arm care is important, even no matter what age you are. But that's why the girls get the long car ride home. Their dads don't mean it like you're a disappointment and you're a bad hitter. They're just addressing the fact that what happened, we worked on that all week and you failed. But that's part of the psychology part of it, as we dive into a little bit more with, I would say, our audience and our members. That's really important to understand the difference. I think I remember a book that I didn't read, but I've experienced it. Men are from Mars and women are from Venus. So we're wired differently, right? And so that communication part of it is you can take the same set of facts, communicate it one way to a young boy, communicate it another way to a young lady. Sounds like two different things, but really you're talking about the same thing. And it's the challenge of really becoming a teacher. Teacher is not having knowledge, it's imparting knowledge and getting across. And that's the ultimate challenge. So let's talk a little bit about, so the importance of arm care and, making a transition so that it goes from a rehab priority. So somebody has, a lot of people understand the term impingement now, or an itis, right? And whether it's their elbow or in their shoulder, but, bringing that along and having an understanding of it so that becomes prehab, that we've used that term before. So don't wait until your arm doesn't work, but, understand it and as an important component of your game, so that you're doing these things to prevent yourself from ending up in a rehabilitation type situation. And again, so the longevity of your arm. So where does it start? Does it start with long toss? You started off talking about long toss, and that was something that I was able to experience as well. But let's talk a little bit about long toss, because I had mentioned to you that softball exists so often in small spaces. The field isn't super big, and it's not that the girls are throwing the ball 300 feet like a baseball player can, but even our warm-up space, when we travel in tournaments on the weekends, you have the games existing on the field. Now your team shows up an hour and a half before a game, and a lot of times we're in little parkways or we're little spaces behind. So you don't really have the space to just space things out. And so therefore we don't really incorporate the concept of a long toss, right? But when we're talking about, what's the best way to develop arm strength? Does it start with understanding long toss, or is that somewhere as far as the primary conversation goes?
Well, I'm going to go back to something you said first, which is arm care before the long toss. We've been doing this for like 30 years now, and I'd say 25 years with bands. And for anybody listening, before we get to throwing, it is automatic for the players that we work with and the teams now. And I feel like it's very common now in baseball. And I actually, to softball, I feel like we've made some inroads there, not just us. Obviously, there's other people out there pushing arm care, but this is, you don't think about it anymore. There's a 10-minute workout. There's a band program. There's Some people use, plyos, whatever it is, weighted balls. There is a 10-minute, you just don't think about anymore. There's 10 minutes of arm care before you touch a ball. That's every day, or that's every time before you touch a ball. So I want to make sure that that point is crystal clear to anybody listening to this. You do not touch a ball. I'll say this 4,000 times. You do not touch a ball. Softball, baseball, volleyball, water polo ball, doesn't matter. You don't touch anything until you have done, as you said, prehab versus rehab. The same exercises that you do for rehab that get your arm so well prepared to come back from rehab after trauma from surgery. And all of a sudden, it's amazing how good people feel, by the way, after rehab, because they've applied themselves to these exercises that are designed to keep you healthy, stable, strong, durable, get to the supportive areas around the shoulder and rotator cuff area. So prehab for us, as you said, it's a beautiful word. It's something we've been using for a long time. You don't even have to think about it. So that's step one. Two, long toss for me is the single greatest thing you can do. Here's a few phrases I use. Throwing is king or queen, either way. Throwing is the bottom line. Arm care is vital. Arm care is important. But at the end of the day, throwing is throwing. So I said 10 minutes, don't think about arm care. I'm going to say, softball, I might say 15 versus 20 minutes because you're not going as far as you are with a baseball. So you don't maybe need quite as much time. But I would say, don't even think about it. It's 15 minutes of throwing, give or take. And if you go to tournaments or you go to places where you can't, let's say, stretch out, we have our own J-band program. So you can do forward throws with the J-bands. And you can do, instead of 20 or 25 like you might do before a normal throwing session, you might do 3 sets of 25. So you're getting some real good reps in there. You're getting a lot of range of motion. You're actually making up for the lack of throwing. So that's one. Two is that if you can't get out far, and you brought this up last time, it's what we have videos where we actually show throwing the ball into a net at different angles. Well, there's a way, as you said, to throw the ball maybe only to 90 to 100 feet, but you throw it higher. So you get some more range of motion that way. The bottom line is this. I always come from the point of view is, what's the right way to do this? Now, I'm not saying you can always pull this off, but the right way for me is, if my arm means a lot to me, and my arm is the reason I'm going to move on in this game as opposed to get thrown out of the game because of an arm injury, or I want to enhance my arm, and that I have a lot of pride in my arm, I'm going to find a way to get to the game 15 minutes earlier. I'll find a parking lot. I'll find a fence to throw in. I'm not getting cheated. And here's another cool thing about, once you get the bug, in other words, once you start doing arm care religiously, once you start throwing with a purpose to long toss, to stretch it out, to develop your arm, and you start seeing how much better your arm gets, you get to a point like you don't ever want to miss. It's sort of like someone who's on a roll with hitting, and they take 50 hacks every time before the game, and that 50 hacks locks them in. And they show up to a game, and someone says, well, you're only going to get 10 hacks today. They're like, nope, I'm getting 50. I'll get up at 6 a.m. and I'll get my 50 hacks, and I'm not missing. And so one of the beautiful things about the arm is it's attached to your body, obviously. You become very intimate the more you invest into it, and it starts producing more for you. So now all of a sudden you get to a point where you're like, man, I'm feeling good. I'm getting stronger. This is all paying off. And then someone says, okay, yeah, but you only get 3 minutes to throw before a game, and that's not working anymore for you. And you just know in this deep, deep recess in your core, in your soul, you're like, I'm not missing anymore. So part of the answer, Tony, really is that you start finding ways to A, get to places earlier. B, I can hear it now. I've heard this before. Yeah, but there's a game after a game after a game, so we really only have 10 minutes or whatever it is. Do tons of forward throws, but I'm still going to find a way. I'm going to find a way to get out to at least 150 feet or just stretch my arm out. And if I really even had to do this, I know this sounds funny, but if I have to go somewhere 3 hours before the game or before the bus leaves or whatever, I'll get my long toss in at the field. It's not ideal, but I'll get my bands, I'll get my long toss in. It's almost like now my arm is incubating, it's warm. And when I get to the field, now my band work is going to just sort of pick up where I left off. Maybe I can't get out to 200 feet or 180 feet, maybe I only get out to 120, but what I did 3 hours ago is going to pay off. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, but at the end of the day, it just becomes prioritization. Like, how valuable is your arm to you? Is it worth, can someone say any more? We didn't have time. And I understand that might be a reality in some situations. And what I'm saying is, I'm finding time.
Yeah, well, and because you find a way to prioritize it, and it becomes almost like you're religious about it, but you almost have to get to that place first, because we're talking about transitioning behavior, right? So one of the things that you had mentioned, and I don't know if I'm saying it the right way, but this is the truth, and for anyone that's experienced a long toss program, is it really frees up your arm. Your arm feels so loose after you play long toss. It stretches everything out. As you follow through, you're not just throwing from like your shoulder girdle, you're throwing all the way down to the lower back muscles. You're really incorporating all your big muscles, and your arm just feels great after it. And the other thing that, again, I think would be a good trigger to a lot of dads' ears, is that you're going to develop a stronger arm. So can we talk a little bit about that as well too? Like, by playing long toss and gradually progressing the distance, and it progresses on its own as your arm gets stronger. So you start off maybe throwing the ball 120, 130 feet, and then you increase that distance. What do you think now is happening from a 5-6 hole shortstop throw to first base? I used to love to take my warm-up throws, probably started in Pony League, from behind the third baseman. For whatever reason, no, the reason was Nolan Ryan and Goose Gossage. I wanted everyone to know that I had the strongest arm in the field. So I would park myself behind the third baseman. And if I couldn't hear that glove pop, then there was something wrong, right? I just took a lot of pride in it. And I'm saying this because I know what that means to a lot of dads. Not that it would mean necessarily the same thing to their daughter, but it increases your arm strength, and it just feels so good afterwards. So can you talk a little bit about that as well, some of the benefits of it?
Yeah, and thank you for circling back, because you sort of mentioned that earlier, and I was so determined to talk about the prioritization of getting your throwing in. So I kind of skipped over
Okay.
only something we've been teaching for 30 years. So thank you for the assist. I said throwing is king or queen. So long toss, the way we break long toss down is what we call the stretching out phase. So that's the moving away from your partner, and then it's the pull down phase, and then coming back into your partner. So I know this is very basic, but just so everybody knows, long toss has those two phases, the stretching out phase and what we call the strengthening or pulling down phase. The reason why so many benefits come from long toss is a couple of things you said. One is we start by throwing the ball with arc, because what we want to do is we want the arc to gradually get bigger. And what that does is it opens the shoulder girdle up in angular positions. Another word is variance, which we'll talk about in a second, how that relates to better accuracy. So number one is health. You're getting better range of motion. So as you throw higher and higher and higher, so 40 feet turns into 60, 80, 90, eventually 150, 180. So the further you go, the higher the ball is going to go. Well, not only are you creating this amazing freedom, stretching, range of motion, as you said, but the higher you start to throw the ball, what happens is you start to activate your legs and your core, and you start to get more athletic. So now we're incorporating the body, not just all this great range of motion in the arm. And what happens is as you go higher and higher and you get more and more freedom, we use the term, open up the arm, stretch the arm out. So you're getting all these great angles. Well, now at some point, once you're fully stretched out, so it's like completely stretching out your hamstrings and quads and calves before you go for a really hard run, or a really hard, 60, if you will. You take this freedom now and you start slowly bringing the arc back down lower and lower as you get closer to your partner. We come in softball, I'd say about 5 feet per throw, but you've created this beautiful range of motion. You've got the legs and core activated. You've got this great feeling in your release point, because you're in all these different angles. And now we're just slowly bringing that range of motion back down lower and lower. And that's what we call the pull down phase. And where arm strength gets benefited is because of the band work. The band work frees up the arm, stretches the arm out, prepares it so that you get out to further distances more freely and in a more healthy way. And now you're taking, again, all this great range of motion. And now you're through that freedom. You're now able to get more safely explosive on the way back down. And so now you're generating this great arm speed because your arm is so freed up. And I will say one other point about where velocity and arm strength comes from. When you've gone, let's say, out to these bigger distances and you've opened your arm up to more angles, and now you're using those angles to your advantage. Another principle we teach is what it means to take your max distance and compress it back in and not decelerate. And this is a very, very subtle point, but this is sort of the art form of developing arm strength. A lot of times athletes, when they come back in from their throwing, let's say even if they did the stretching out part perfectly, they'll come back in and they'll play what we call catch. They'll throw the ball so they get it back to their partner, but they don't want to throw it over their head, and they don't want to bounce them. And part of that's good because they're building accuracy, but they're not building the ultimate accuracy, and I'll explain that in a second. But what's happening is they're teaching their arm also to decelerate a little bit, and we do the opposite. So let's say you go out to 150 feet as your max throw. We tell our athletes when you come back into 140, we still want you to throw at 150. We're just lowering the angle by 2 degrees. And when you get back in each of those throws, the idea is you're maintaining the same distance. We call your max distance X. So you're maintaining X all the way back in. And the reason this is so important is because when you get to, let's say, 90 feet, normally you might throw a 90-foot throw 90 feet. Our way is you're taking that X 150. Now, of course, you better aim like at your partner's toes or maybe 5 feet in front of their toes because you just did go uphill. But what happens now is you start training the arm to have this more explosive downhill compression, if you will, of the throw. And the closer you get to your partner without obviously doing anything dangerous, the more you're going to generate arm strength. Because think about this. If you threw a ball 150 feet at, let's say, 35 degrees, and now you're throwing a ball, let's say you get back into 70 feet, and now you're throwing the ball down at a downhill angle, but you're maintaining X, you're compressing all that great range of motion, all that great freedom, and now you're getting the benefit, we call that leverage, right? Now you're leveraging that freedom into explosiveness downhill because you're throwing through your partner because you're maintaining X. And that's the key, is you're maintaining X. And a lot of times athletes will subconsciously, they'll decelerate on the way back in because they don't want to play chase. It doesn't look good. They're going to miss their partner. Now, the last piece to this is, why does this build accuracy? If I take a 150-foot throw, which is X, and in my brain, it's black and white, I'm only throwing X. I don't care where I'm at on the field, I'm throwing X. What happens is I start to get very intimate with my release point and the different distances. So as an example, when I'm at 140, my brain says, oh, I'm still throwing at X. I'm still making my furthest throw. I'm just aiming a little lower. 130, the same thing, 120, 110. What happens is you hit every position on the field and you make every throw, whether you're an outfielder or an infielder. You make every throw on the way back in, but here's the difference. You're now making a connection with your brain that I'm always throwing 100%. So there's no gray area in my brain. It's black and white, okay? Now, depending upon where I'm on the field, if I practice these throws every day, I've hit 150, I've hit 120, I've hit 108, I've hit 92 feet, I've hit 84 feet, I've hit 72 feet. It doesn't matter because I'm always throwing it X. So I'm always throwing it with complete max distance. And all of a sudden now I can acclimate my release point to my feel, because if I do this every day, if you just throw a ball at me at 82 feet now, I know from 82 feet from doing this every day, I got to aim about your shins to hit you here. And so you actually can start to increase dramatically your accuracy, because now you've taken the gray area out of your brain of how to throw a ball. And now you know your throws are always with full intent, or at least close to full intent.
Yeah, there's some great points that you just made. And again, I'd like to kind of create terms that people can maybe visualize a little bit better. So when we talk about long toss and throwing with an arc, the most simple way I've described it to players and even to coaches is just you're throwing fly balls, right? If somebody wants you to throw fly balls to them, think about how you're going to throw fly balls, because it's like if they don't visualize that and you watch them play and they're stretching it out, but they're not creating the arc. The long toss is when we do want the McDonald's arches. We do want the ball to go lower to higher, come down, the big rainbows, and to be able to increase that. So you're learning to throw fly balls at different distances. Excuse me. And then the other thing that you said that I think is very important, because again, those that have experienced this is, man, does your arm feel great when you bring it back in short. And so apprehension, I believe, especially in the fast pitch industry, apprehension's all over the place. And why I think it's a subconscious result that when somebody makes a mistake, coaches often point out what they do wrong. And so you have no freedom. You use that word as well. But when we're diagnosing and we're constantly telling a player what they did wrong and why they made a mistake, they're not free. They kind of get put on a tightrope, and now they're afraid to make a mistake. So if we talk about how great your arm is going to be, and then once you get into that short distance, we talk about popping the glove, and the other term you use, and this, I think this is really important, is you're throwing through a target, not to a target. If you throw to a target, then it's naturally going to, as you said, decelerate, and the throw's going to die down a little bit. I remember Coach Horton saying this, our first year in college, and that is, look, if you throw a ball away from the 5-6 hole and it sails over the first baseman's head and goes up to row 20, I'm okay with that. He goes, but if you Judy it and you short arm it, you throw it into the dirt, he goes, I don't ever want to see an error like that, because it's a different mentality with that. And I think that's really important. Now the advantage of, because we're talking about long toss where you're creating an arc, but now, especially in the fast pitch industry and the increased value and the advantage, everyone wants to know they have an advantage, right? The advantage you have when the ball comes out of the hand, I'll do it this way. The ball comes out of the hand and you're playing short distance and it doesn't go upward, but it is that downward plane that you talked about. It's downward to the chest of your partner. That instantly stands out. You can have 30 girls playing catch with each other, and you're going to see, most of the time, you're going to see this arc, while they're playing short, Alan, while they're playing short. And then you notice the two that are playing like this, and they're throwing with X's straight across, and they instantly stand out. And so again, I think that there are terms that our coaches and our dads can learn to apply a little bit, because our team, you talked about, they have to play long toss. They're always going to find a way to stretch the arm, no matter what limited space our players are in. You're never going to see them start to play short only. They're always going to find something somehow, even if it's throwing the ball higher than it is farther, but they understand the importance of it. And then a byproduct of that is, obviously this is something we wanted, but it has to prove itself, is we don't have a lot of arm injuries. Our kids are able to throw from, the most important higher slot for when, a 5-6 hole, a relay from an outfielder to host somebody at home, a center fielder throwing a one bounce or on the fly to throw somebody out at the plate. But then, in fast pitch, as in baseball, the arm starts to, you've got to throw 3/4 on some plays. You've got to throw here from some plays. You got to pick the ball up down and off the ground and throw from the ground, because in fast pitch, you pick that ball up to here with one of these slappers, and you've just given her 2 to 3 steps. So now you're able to find all these different spots, but it's the highest point. It's the downward trajectory. It's getting on top. And, I remember the first time I saw or broke down on video a center fielder throwing the ball home in baseball, and how that release point was exactly like a baseball pitcher in his tops card. And it was the same thing, except the center fielder will barrel roll afterwards. But then if you look at the unique follow through of like Bob Gibson, or way the leg will flop over, it's this continuous energy, right? And so you had brought that up as well too, that as you start to increase that distance, you're going to start using your legs. You're going to start understanding the importance of a crow hop or a skip step, that it has to start with your legs and it transfers through your body. I think that's important, because pitching or throwing overhand, so underhand pitching in fast pitch, you need a whip. The more that arm acts like a whip, the more it's acting as a result of all that chain of energy that you built up with your body. And I thought it was really interesting to watch Monica Abbott throw long tossed underhand. And because I think that's something that's not really known by a lot of people. And there is arguably one of the hardest, if not the hardest throwers in the world right now. And yes, she's always been gifted. She's always thrown hard, but this arm care is a fixture with her. So here she is. She's still pitching and doing well at the age she graduated from college a few years ago. But, can we talk quickly about just the underhand long toss part and what that's done for Monica and how that's important for her? And almost again, she plays catch religiously, long toss style.
Yeah, when we met Monica, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago, and it was really cool because she did have a long toss history. And I think what we did is we kind of gave her a little more structure or insight to things like length equals strength. And it's funny, she's given us some terms, like we say pull down in baseball, she says pull up in softball. So now we have to we know now to use the term pull up instead of pull downs. And for those that are listening, please check out, we have a video with her on YouTube where we not only go over the long toss, we actually go through our J-band program. And when we were filming that day, she actually showed us, she created like 3 other exercises. She said, these would be very helpful for underhand throwers to add these in. So there's actually 3 additional exercises for softball players because of her. But no, she just took to it. I think, again, it was something she did. But boy, if you talk to her now, I think the bands have really, really helped her. It's an absolute staple. It's not just because she's like our ambassador in softball. She will tell you flat out, it is religion to her. It's just part of her workout. She loves the bands. And you can look at any of her, you go to her Instagram account or wherever, you'll see she's posted quite a bit of stuff about that. But look, throwing is king, throwing is queen. In this case, there's a reason why, as you said, at her age, which of course she's still very young, but she's better than ever. I watched some of her Olympic outings and you could feel it. She is better now than ever. And I believe it's well, there's a lot of reasons, but I know from our point of view, for the purpose of this conversation, she is religious and diligent about her bands. She's religious and diligent about her long toss. And I'll tell you another thing that I think is important. We'll talk sometimes because she knows, like when she had like the Olympic trials, let's say 3 years ago coming up or something, and she had some dead time between Japan or here, or Houston, so what she's done, which I really appreciate about her, is she does what she's the only person I've done this, I believe, with softball, is really go through the stuff that we do a lot in baseball, which is sort of the buildup and the progressions and what does that look like. So she's actually keyed into what does it look like to start from scratch, to build the throwing program, to prep so that she's peaking at the right time. In the case of the trials with the Olympics, it might have been in January, it might have been 2 outings, it wasn't, but we may have started talking in November and said, okay, here's the plan, and here's sort of the progression, if you will, which is something we love. We have a throwing manual for baseball, a year-round throwing manual. So I know we don't have maybe time to get into that too much, but just as a side note, that is another piece that is so crucial for the girls to understand, is that it's not just about bands, it's not just about long toss. Those are massive, but it's also how are you developing your throwing program so that you have a progression that works, that makes sense, that optimizes your buildup, that optimizes your health, your endurance, your velocity, your recovery. So that's just another area of, yes, Monica is great with long toss, but she's also now taken it to another level where she's very keyed into what does the progression look like? Because you don't just come out, as of course, you don't come out day one and throw 140 feet, right? Or in her case, maybe 160, 70 feet underhand. It takes 2-3 weeks to get there. And so I just want to make that actually as a point as well, that this is, yes, about long toss and arm care, but also what are you doing to educate yourself so that you know what that 3 or 4 week window looks like to get yourself in optimal shape, because there is a period of just pure development.
Sure. Well, I think trying to create what I call inspirational conversations so people can take the information and be inspired to dig into it a little bit deeper. And we'll talk about at the end of this how they can find out more about this. But again, because so many dads and the reality is in fast pitch, there are so many pitchers that feel like their only source of value is how hard they throw. Right. And it comes from the men's world because that's kind of where we were. And pitching is something else. It's another conversation as far as being successful as a pitcher. But I'll give this to those dads out there that your daughter's a pitcher, she wants to be able to throw harder. And especially when we talk about the rise ball, right? So being able to get under the rise ball and create that upspin on it. So if you look at, even at 16s and 18s, we're at 43 feet and the release point, let's just say it's at 38 feet or 36 feet, but you're playing long toss, right? You've got the distance between these two players and they're increasing that distance. So let's call this 36 feet. I'm going the wrong way. There we go. So this is about 36 feet from the pitcher to the catcher. Now this pitcher is throwing a long toss, and let's say she could only throw it 95 feet her rise ball at the beginning when she first starts playing, but she progressively does it right. She starts to understand it. Now she's going farther. She increases the distance. I'm losing it. Where'd I go? There we go. And she increases distance maybe 130 feet, 140 feet, 150 feet. Bring it back in. What do you think that ball that is now going 140 feet is doing back at 36 feet? It's exploding through that spot because it's on its way, like you said, X, right? It's on its way to that final destination point. And if you can't imagine, if you took the catcher out of the way of Monica Abbott and took the backstop out of the way, her pitch is not dying at the backstop. Her pitch is going through the parking lot. And so it's not about throwing 70 or being, having the special gift that she has and that she's worked to attain, but it really is just bringing the best out of who you are, being the best that you can be. So there's a place that we really can incorporate it. And so I appreciate that, because I also wanted to point out long toss is not just for overhand. It's for underhand as well. And again, hopefully some people are inspired to just dig a little bit deeper into this. I want to finish, even though we probably should have started with this, but finish with just a little more about the J bands, right? So, everyone's seen it. They've seen the surgical tubing, they've seen the attachments on the fence, and a lot of people are aware of it, but they don't really understand it. And if I was to start, to kind of initiate an understanding or maybe an intrigue from people, we're talking about addressing the shoulder girdle, and we're talking about addressing the rotator cuff muscles. And I try to give people the analogy, okay, all muscles are like meat, right? And so, but when you're talking about the rotator cuff muscles and kind of the specific functions they have with, your external rotators, and I won't get into the names, you don't need that, but just think of, they're not big steaks, they're not big T-bones, they're not big briskets, they're just a little bigger than strips of bacon. And so what can happen to them as a result of this forward projection and being able to, the projectile part of it, they can get damaged, they can get overused, they can get stressed, they can heat up and start to cause problems, right? And so the J bands really start to understand how to strengthen those particular small muscles. Am I correct? And that's a really big part and just one component of the J band program, but it's going to specifically strengthen a unique part of your shoulder girdle that doesn't get strengthened. The internal, external exercises aren't things that we do in normal days. So you have to specifically train those. So can we talk a little bit about that and kind of why? Because the exercises are still pretty basic. It's not something that has progressed and now, whoa, look at the rotation exercises from 95 to now. It's still basic, right? But so critical to arm care.
Yeah, well, you set up on a T for me, because really what you said is crucial. The rotator cuff, there's four very, very small muscles. They're very hard to get to. Most things you do exercise-wise in life are going to recruit your big muscles, right? It's just normal. Your big muscles are going to take over in most situations. So these exercises were designed to get to the small muscles. That's the whole key. I use the analogy a lot of, it's like inside out versus outside in. You gotta get in to the small muscles, because it's the small muscles that are getting taxed and worked, especially when you throw forward and the deceleration part of your shoulder is, like brake pads are just working. And so one of the most important aspects of band work is not just to get to the little muscles. That's of course the main thing, but it's to get to the back part of the rotator cuff, the decelerators, if you will, because those are the ones that are doing all the work. Again, those are the brake pads. So these exercises are designed to expose or get into those little muscles, muscles that are just, as you said, if you're not doing internal, external work, it's just hard to get into that world. And then also, I would say that bands do some other really important basic things: oxygenation, range of motion, warmth, the kinds of things you want to do to get into not just the small muscles, but the entire shoulder. And then also, when you do band work, you'll find out that it's not just the shoulder work, yes, but it's also the supporting areas. Because as we know, from a kinesiology point of view, like everything connects to everything. So just so everybody knows that, yes, we're going to first attack the shoulder and the smaller muscles and get to those, because those are hard to get to. But eventually, you're really also getting to the auxiliary parts as well. And I'll say one last thing. If nothing else, look at band work as you said, you're getting to the small muscles that are hard to get to, but also a key word is your balance, because you do so much forward motion and there's so much work there, and there's so much work. Again, the back of the shoulder is doing so much work. A lot of band work is about external rotation. It's about getting to the back of the shoulder. And also, after throwing, you can do a post-throwing arm care routine as well. So the idea is that, as you said, you're opening up yourself to a new world. It's like, okay, there's something going on in my shoulder that needs to be addressed, and it's not the big muscles that are already getting the work and attention. It's the small muscles, and the bands are just a magical way of getting to areas that are just tricky to get to.
Working a little bit in the physical therapy world, and I don't know where I heard it, but there are two ways that people end up with shoulder rehab. One is through throwing sports, and the other is through just becoming middle-aged. And just as far as there's just a natural wear and tear. Plus, if you look at anatomically, we do everything forward, right? So we drive forward, we're at our desk forward, we're on our phones forward. So the whole rounding out of the shoulders, anatomically, we start to change a little bit. So even parents that have had shoulder injuries, not necessarily from throwing, but they've been in rehab for that. What's the first thing they do with you people? They start pinching your shoulder blades back. You start getting on the rowing machine. So you start developing things posteriorly. And again, I think I want people to understand, and hopefully they've taken part of this conversation, and you're inspired to become more professionally educated in what we're doing. I don't want to say we have a responsibility. I could say it that way to our coaches, right? But responsibility, that word even scares me sometimes, because I want to be a kid all the time. But we do have a responsibility. Or how about just being inspired to dig a little deeper? Yes, you can get away with a lot of things in playing softball. There are 75-year and older leagues. My gosh, I don't think there's an athletic requirement. It's just that you live long enough. There's slow pitch, there's church leagues, that there's the challenger divisions in little league and everything. So the requirement is just that you're on a field and you're able to have fun with whatever physical limitations you have. But we're talking specifically in our industry right now that we talk about equality, right? We talk about the women getting what men get. And I always implore people to think about, well, then take pride in what you're doing. Don't act less than, act the same. Take pride in the professionalism, take pride in your education. And it doesn't have to be something that's like you're eating something that's good for you, but you don't enjoy eating it. You can really have fun with these conversations. For me, I've tied our conversations into how I grew up and how I warmed up, playing Pony League, Colt League, playing long toss for the first time and seeing somebody. I didn't like to see anybody throw harder than me. And again, I'd like to think Coach Horton's had so many great players and going on to big league success and everything else, but gosh dang it, he better remember what the arm that this little guy had, when I was out there. And really that allowed me, I think I mentioned to you, to have a role on one of the best teams that I ever had in that program, because I had a great arm. And so it allowed me to become a pitcher, since there were some other pretty good shortstops that went on to do some pretty good things. And so I just encourage people to really think about it and say, okay, so what's my next step? Because I think helping people become proactive is very important. We worry about our kids. There's an obsession of love, and there's an overprotectiveness, and there's softball families and parents are very proactive. They're going to make decisions, but are they always educated decisions? You don't want your decisions to be emotional based. You want to recognize your emotions, but you always want to have some type of education or information that allows you to make the right decision and not being impulsive or anything like that. So, I just really appreciate this conversation. And Lucas, our film director, he's going to incorporate some pictures and some videos into this podcast. So as we're having this conversation, so whether it's a little bit of Monica long toss or just some different things, or maybe our team's doing it, is people will have some visual takeaways. But then I want to end with you on that. We've got the throwing program. The next conversation, we are going to talk about getting focused and staying focused and kind of this whole thing. And I don't know why I just got a picture of like Nuke LaLoosh and what he didn't understand in Bull Durham. It's kind of funny. A lot of people don't, there's a certain amount of people still remember that, but breathing through the eyelids, all of these different things, right? But just a state of mind and how important that is to not only the functional level of players, but just how we function in life. So that's really the next step and where I want to bridge this next conversation we have. But Alan, where can people find more information? So jagersports.com, right, is your website. But how about social media? How about letting people know where can they access more information if they want to find out a little bit more and dig deeper into kind of the J-Band program, long toss, a little bit more about Alan Jaeger and Jager Sports?
Yeah. First of all, We have so much free information. It's hysterical. You could go to our website, as you said, jagersports.com. We have an article resource page. We have a podcast page where we'll put this one up, but you can listen to podcasts about throwing programs, about mental game. Social media is at Jager Sports, both on Twitter and Instagram. And also, if they have questions, they can email us. It's basically info@jagersports.com. But we're pretty easy to track down. But really, we have so much information out there. As you said, the YouTube video, we have a Monica, we have an overhand video also of long toss for the position players. A lot of mental game stuff. It's all on YouTube and our website. It's very easy to find.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. And, there are more conversations to be had on how we can make this more accessible. Again, the associations and a lot of the collaborations that I'm part of right now. So we have a great target audience that need this. So we will get more structured as far as, creating more opportunities for people to get their hands on it. Right now, just take this conversation, people, think about it, right? A couple of things that stuck with you, explore a little bit on your own time into what Alan's doing. And, again, he's one of the pioneers and kind of set the standard. There's a lot of throwing concepts. There's a lot of things and a lot of good things being done. But I just appreciate where you come from, your perspective on how this fits into a bigger picture of life. And that, in the end, I feel like, you and I could have played a lot of catch as 12-year-olds, just kind of hanging all day like that too. So on a personal level, I just really, really appreciate your time. I enjoy the conversations, and I look forward to the next time we talk about the much bigger picture of the mental game and mental health and how it all kind of goes into slowing down, which even if I talk like this, just feels a little funny, but got to do it. So,
and a couple of deep breaths. Sorry, I interrupted your slow
That's
talk.
okay. I'm telling you, just one of those guys. I just hear a little bit, and automatically, it's just like, this. I don't want to get weird, but I tell you, my mom growing up, she just made it a habit to just scratch my back at night. And I would tell you, it's the one thing that I think mostly what I heard from my brothers is, do you ever shut up and do you ever sit down? But if my mom scratched my back for 2 minutes, I'm asleep like that. Well, she's no longer around. So I've got to find these YouTube videos and things like that, because it is an important part of just resetting and slowing things down. So that's the bridge to the next conversation. But listen, thanks everyone for listening, and just stay tuned because there's more to come with Alan Jager and Jager Sports. So Alan, appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you next time. Okay.
Thanks a million for having me on, buddy. I appreciate it.